So today we are going to be looking at factoring quadratic trinomials. And a quadratic trinomial is an expression that has three terms and the highest degree is 2. So in a trinomial, yes, you have three terms. The first one should be that quadratic term. And that should be your x squared. In this case today, we will not have a leading coefficient that's not 1. So all of the factoring we do today will be pretty easy because we're just looking at what to do with those second two terms. In the next lesson, we will talk about what to do when you have one of those leading coefficients that's not a GCF. And then the next term is a linear term because the degree of x is 1. And so that coefficient is going to be something that we're looking at quite a bit today. Then the last term is what we call a constant. And so this creates our three terms. So when in standard form, which is what I highly suggest you always factor from, you should have that quadratic term in front, then the linear term, and then the constant. So to factor a trinomial, you're going to split that trinomial into two binomials. So you'll have two sets of parentheses. And today we will just be splitting the power of x, and then we will be splitting those terms into two numbers. So we're kind of undoing FOIL. So to do this, we are going to look for factors that multiply to be C and add up to be B. So we do have some clues from our signs that make this a little bit easier. So first of all, if our C is positive, then our factors should have the same sign. So the sign in front of B actually tells you what sign you are going to need. So if C is positive and B is positive, then both those signs in the middle are going to be positive because two positive numbers multiplied together will give you a positive result. And then if C is positive and B is negative, both signs will be negative because a negative times a negative equals a positive. So again, your integer rules are coming into play here. Then if we have a C that is negative, then our factors will have the opposite signs. So your signs will not match. You'll have a positive and a negative. Then the sign of B is actually going to be what we call the larger factor, like its absolute value will be larger. So if the larger factor is positive, if B is positive, your larger factor is positive. And then if B is negative, then your larger factor is going to be the negative factor. So let's go ahead and take a look at factoring some of these expressions. So remember, we're undoing FOIL. So we want to have two sets of parentheses. So for x squared plus 15x plus 50, we have a positive C and a positive B. So both of these are positive. So both signs will be positive. So we will have x plus something and x plus something else. So then we need to figure out two numbers, multiply to be 50 and add up to be 15. So of course, if you don't know your multiplication tables, this gets a little difficult, but you can always get out your calculator and start dividing. So we know that, let's see, 1 times 50 is 50, but it adds up to be 51. So that's not going to work. And then we have 2 and 25 that also multiply to be 50. But 2 plus 25 is 27. And so that's also not going to work. So then, see, we can't divide evenly by 3 or 4, but we can by 5, and that leaves us with 10. And 5 plus 10 is 15. So that's going to be our winners here. So x plus 5 and x plus 10 are our factors. Now, if I did switch those around to be x plus 10 and x plus 5, then that would be fine because you can rearrange multiplication. So let's go ahead and look at the next problem. So we have x squared minus 11 plus 24. And so we have a c is positive and a b that is negative. So since c is positive, and b is negative, both factors will have a negative. So we are looking for x minus something and then x minus something else. So we are going to look at those factors of 24. And so we have 1 and 24. Then we have 2 and 12. 3 and 8. And then 4 and 6. But we need both of these to be negative. So we're going to make all of these numbers negative. So negative 1 plus negative 24 is negative 25. That's not going to work. Negative 2 and negative 12 give us negative 14. That's also not going to work. But then negative 3 and negative 8 give us negative 11. And so that's going to be our factors, x minus 3 and x minus 11. So then on our next problem, we have a negative c and a positive b. And so since c is negative and b is positive, our signs are not going to match, but our larger factor is going to be positive. So we are going to have x plus something, and that'll be our larger factor, and x minus something. So then we will go ahead and look at factors of negative 63. Or if it helps, you can think about factors of just 63, and then we can put in the signs here in a second. So we could have 1 and 63. 2 will not work, but we'll have 3 and 21. 4 won't work, 5 won't work, neither will 6, but 7 will. So 7 and 9, and that should be everything. Now, since b is positive, the larger factor will be positive, so I'm going to put a negative on the smaller factors. So then 63 minus 1 is 62. That will not work. 21 minus 3 is 18. That also will not work. But 9 minus 7 gives us 2, and that will work. So these are our factors. So on our next problem, we have x squared minus 4x minus 12. Now again, c is negative. So since c is negative, then our signs are not going to match. But since b is positive, then our larger factor will have a negative sign on it. So we have x minus something and x plus something. And then we're going to look at our factors of negative 12. So we have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. So we will have the larger factor be negative this time, since that b is negative. So we're going to put our negatives on those factors. And then we have 1 minus 12. That's a negative 11. 2 minus 6 is a negative 4. And then 3 minus 4 is a negative 1. So we'll have x minus 6 and x plus 2. So on this next problem, I want you guys to go ahead and actually try both of these two on your own, and then hit play again to see how you did. So go ahead and pause the video and then work these out and then come back to check your answers. All right, so with getting started here, we have a C that's negative and a B that's positive. So we know our larger factor is going to be a positive number, but our signs will not match. So we will have n plus something and n minus something. So for negative 18, we're looking at factors of 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and then 3 and 6. So we're looking at our smaller factors being negative. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So negative 1 plus 18 is 17. Negative 2 plus 9 is 7. And negative 3 plus 6 is 3. So that is the factor pair that we need. So we have n plus 6 and n minus 3. And then for our last problem here, we have r squared plus 10r plus 21. So we have a c that's positive, a b that is also positive. So our signs will actually match. So we're going to have r plus something and r plus something else. So for what those somethings are, for 21, we have 1 and 21. 2 will not work, but then we have 3 and 7. So 1 plus 21 is 22. So that is definitely not going to work for our B. But then 3 plus 7 is 10. We already know it multiplies to be 21. So that should be our answer. So just to kind of recap here, the two factoring lessons that we have done so far do wind up going together. Because as we said in the last lesson, step number 1 needs to be factoring out that GCF if at all possible. And then you need to ask yourself, is it a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1? Which means that you don't see that number in front. And if so, you need to factor it into two binomials. And remember that you're looking for two factors that multiply to be C and add up to be B. We will, of course, be adding more steps to this as we go. But for now, these are the two main steps that you need. And of course, if you need your signs to help you, you can go back to the more specific instructions that we had for getting our signs broken down that were at the beginning of the notes.